I was thinking a lot about doing this because so many of my friends and even people in my family have been like, you should write a book. You should do a TV series. Like, there's just a lot of drama. And it's really hard for me to talk about because on one hand, it's like all very deeply personal. On the other hand, you know, it makes people that I love, that I care for, look bad. And when I was younger, I was a lot angrier about things, but the older I got, and especially picking up like a meditation practice and understanding more about basic goodness and that, you know, people don't turn into these things out of nowhere. Like, people will make decisions because of something that's happened to them. The caveat I want to give is that I love these people very much and I care for them and I understand how things happened the way they did. And I'm not angry anymore, and I've done a lot of healing, and I feel like I can hold space in my heart for both feeling like I went through a lot of trauma, and I went through a lot of pain, and I also love these people very much, still do, to this day.
Welcome to Friends with Deficits. I'm your host, Adam Sultan, and my next friend is Kat O'Kane. Kat currently works in AI with a focus on neural networks and large language models, and she makes music with her band Pocket 20. I'll leave some links in the show notes for more info, but for now, let's listen to my conversation with Kat O'Kane.
Yeah, this is basically my journey with complex PTSD and understanding things that I started learning about in my later 20s and 30s to kind of make sense of what happened to me. I was born in Virginia, and I was born to two parents, mom and dad, and they were married at the time, but they got divorced when I was 2.
Why do you say to two parents?
Because some people have single parents, and some people have gay parents, and
Right,
you know, I was born to like mom and dad.
Yep.
We had house, we were okay.
Yeah.
I guess technically. And when I was 2 or 3, my parents divorced. I moved in with my mom, and I didn't know exactly what was going on. I got hit a lot. So hairbrushes, wooden spoons, things like broken on me, like spanking. And
How old were you?
I was like 3, 4.
How bad a child can you be at 3?
And you know, my parents' divorce was very messy.
Yeah.
My mom was very angry, and my dad was very bad at social cues. And you know, they would do stuff like my mom would, you know, I'm leaving, that's it, it's over, and then she'd move out. But then she'd like ask my dad to like take her clothes shopping. My dad doesn't like understand things, so he would just take her clothes shopping, thinking they're gonna get back together. I don't know. It was all very messy. And at the time, she was working and getting a PhD, so she was just very busy and stressed out for those things, and also had 2 kids. So my brother is 6 years older than me, and the reason he's that much older is because my mom and dad had 6 miscarriages between my brother and me. And you know, the older I've gotten, the more I kind of like that hits a lot heavier, because I realized like there were 6 babies that they thought they had that they lost. And some of these were like late losses, like late 2nd trimester, going to do an ultrasound, baby's dead. Yeah. So it's like some pretty hard stuff. And so I think like by the time they had me, one, I was very planned and I was like a miracle, but it was like now the gloves are off or whatever. It's like we got the 2nd kid and it's harder to stay together. So my mom was very physically abusive, but she was also like awesome. Like she put me in dance classes. I would do ballet. I would do theater. I would do like arts and crafts and stuff. She would go like rollerblading with us. She always had pets around and was a gardener. So like I learned how to garden pretty early. She was a writer, and she really cared about poetry a lot and writing short stories. So she started working on that a lot when I was living with her. And when I was 5 or 6, she wanted to move to Oregon from Virginia. And when you're in a custody arrangement, you usually can't move out of state. Mm-hmm. The reason she wanted to move to Oregon is a lot of her family is up there. Her dad's family in particular, they have a lot of support up there. So there were lots of cousins, uncle, aunt, and she felt like she had a better family support over there. But my dad in Virginia was like, you can't move her out of state, or you can't move them, because it was me and my brother. And my mom kind of sold her house And in the middle of selling her house, she accepted one offer, and then she turned around and accepted another offer. Then she got sued by the first offer people, and there was a lot of like financial chaos that happened from there. And my dad then sued for custody in the middle of that because she was planning on moving out of state. And so she just kind of kidnapped us. And we got in our station wagon with I think we had a dog and a cat.
Oh my God. How old were you at this time?
5 or 6.
Your brother was like 12 or something?
Yes. Yeah. And the thing about my brother being 12 is like he remembers more of the fighting than I do. I was so little that I just don't. As far as I knew, I blinked into existence, and my parents weren't a couple. So I just like don't know any of that. But my brother saw more of the trauma before that. But yeah, she just kidnapped us, and we drove all over the country. I remember we visited like her cousin in Tennessee or something like that. And I remember going like to a pond and seeing frogs there. I remember we got up to Mount Rushmore, and I remember going to Mount Rushmore and just seeing like lights on these faces, and I was so confused. And then I remember landing in Oregon, and we moved onto her uncle's property. He had an Airstream trailer, so we moved into an Airstream trailer. And then at some point, my dad got us back. And it's very foggy to me what all happened, but I do know that she essentially kidnapped us in the middle of a custody trial, which is just don't do that. And the other thing through all of this, like both of my parents were in like financial ruins. So we were very poor. So like, again, we lived in an Airstream, and my dad, when my parents divorced, he kept the house, but he had a really hard time holding down a job. He had this one job for like 10 years where he'd get fired, he'd get rehired, he'd get fired, he'd get rehired, and money was always really tight. So when we moved in with him, like my mom was the gardener. My mom grew food, so we had vegetables. When we moved in with my dad, it just basically went straight up like breakfast cereal for breakfast and bread for dinner, pasta for dinner sometimes. Yeah, we just didn't eat well at all. And
what did your mom do at this point?
So my mom decided that she wanted to get custody back, and she wanted to look more stable for the court. So she got remarried. My mom converted to Catholicism when she married my dad. And when they divorced, she tried a couple things. Folks in her family were Quaker, and then I think she was Muslim for a little bit, and then she converted to Judaism. And so she met a guy at Temple, and they got married. And what I've learned as I got older was he had kidney failure, and she was a match. And so they got married under the assumption that he would make her look more stable for the courts, and then she would give him a kidney if she got her kids back. And that feels like a really outlandish thing. Like as my brother says, though, you never know why people get married. So that was their deal.
A weird bargaining chip. You know?
Weird bargaining chip. So yeah, then I was Jewish all of a sudden.
Is she in Oregon now, or did she come back?
She's in Oregon, yeah. She stayed in Oregon.
Okay.
Yeah, so she just did some stuff over there to try to look more stable. And my dad just was never home. I would do a lot of stuff where I'd like go to school, and I would be at daycare after school, and he wouldn't come pick me up. So I would go home with like the daycare people. And like I lived with them on and off for a little bit of time. And then my dad got this girlfriend in Massachusetts, and he would just like go up there for weekends. So his parents would fly in sometimes to take care of us because he would be kind of off somewhere. And my grandparents would come, and they'd be like, let's try some green beans, let's eat a salad. So my mom was having like a lot of financial struggles, and she wouldn't pay for flights or things to go see her. And so I don't know too much about the specifics of this, but for 3 years, we would go visit her during the summer and then winter vacation. And otherwise, my dad had custody of us during the school year. But there was lots of weirdness. So like my grandparents lived in Dallas, and my mom's parents lived in Kansas. And so we'd do these weird interludes where we'd be in Dallas or Kansas for like 2-3 weeks at a time. We'd go to Oregon for a couple of months, and we would be flying across country by ourselves. My brother,
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, so my brother's 13, I'm 7, and we would get like a 12-hour layover in Denver. And we would just be little kids running around Denver by ourselves.
How did you know to like, oh, we've got to get back to that flight? No.
I think my brother probably handled most of that, but like, my brother and I would say are very close, but I have lots of memories of like, we would run around the airports grabbing these smart carts and returning them to get quarters, because there was an arcade in Denver at the time, and we would go to the arcade with all the quarters we got from the smart cards. And again, we had 12-hour layovers, like long layovers, because this was before Kayak or Skyscan or any of that. It was like we knew the flight schedules and we had to like pick two and buy the ticket via phone. And so we would get the quarters, go to the arcade. My brother would like distract the guy at the arcade or like wait for him to be distracted, and then he would push me up to the top of the skee ball, and I would just throw little balls in like the 100, just ding 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 ding, and we'd get all these tickets and just like get stuff at the arcade. So I mean, I look back on it fondly, but in hindsight I'm like, where were the adults? Like, I think
No kidding. Yeah.
my niece now, my oldest niece is 8, and I look at her and I'm like, I can't picture you 2 years younger running around an airport. Like, that just makes no sense in my head, but I know it happened. So, and I think that's like one of the weird things about my childhood is like I look back and think, really? Like that, I know that happened. That feels so wild that I would just be left home alone. Like one time my brother came back from, he was in 9th grade at the time, I think. And he came back and I had been alone at home all day. I must have been 8 and I was sick.
Where were you at this point?
Virginia.
Okay.
So when we were in school, we were in Virginia. So he came home as a 14-year-old. I had been home alone all day, sick. My dad went to work. Who leaves an 8-year-old at home alone all day, just by myself with some bread?
This sounds really old school. Like you know, this would have happened in the 70s or something.
I know. So like people always talk about like, well, 70s kids are different. And I was born in the 80s, but I grew up in the 90s. Yeah. So like I had that experience of just like, well, it's kind of funny because people say latchkey kid and my dad actually says free range.
Free range.
I was a free range kid. But, you know, my brother called the police and they came and did like an investigation of it and stuff. And like.
Wait, your brother called the police on your father?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there were other times that like the police were involved in my life. So like back when my mom still lived in Virginia, one time my dad came to pick me up for like to go trick or treating for Halloween. And I remember this. And he walked up to the house to ring the doorbell. And I guess she decided he wasn't supposed to do that and he was trespassing. So she called the police. And he got arrested and was in jail for some time. And then he finally got cleared. So, like, I remember, like...
Just for ringing a doorbell on Halloween?
Yeah.
Weird.
My mom wasn't very stable, but I'll get into that. So, like, you know, I know my dad went to jail. And I was, like, supposed to go trick-or-treating. Instead, I watched my dad go away in handcuffs, which is very weird. So, yeah, my brother called the cops. And, like, cops were such a big part of my childhood. My brother basically called the cops every time something went wrong because my dad was just not around. And my mom, I think, and this is the part of his story that I don't know how to tell because I don't fully know everything. Mm-hmm. But I think my mom and my brother were obviously very close. And I think my mom was kind of leveraging my brother to do certain things to make her look better. Mm-hmm. And again, every time we were with my mom, we would do fun stuff. Like on summers, I would be in gymnastics. I would do dance class. I was in theater. Like she had me do all these fun things that I never got to do when I was with my dad, because with my dad, he just was gone and I would sit at home and like watch TV. Like I had nothing to do. Yeah, so somewhere during that time, my brother ran away from home and I don't fully know all the details. I know that he taped over or something the door to school so it wouldn't set off the alarm. He showed up for homeroom, checked in, and then he left out that door so he wouldn't set off the emergency exit. My mom's friend picked him up from school, drove him to the airport, and he flew from Virginia to Oregon. And the only reason they fully caught him, and by they I mean the state police, they fully caught him was because he had a layover, and I want to say it was in Chicago or something, and he called to say that he wouldn't be able to get me from daycare because like at that point it was his responsibility as a 13, 14-year-old kid. Jesus. I know. And because he called at a specific time, my dad knew, he worked with someone who knew flight, he was autistic and he knew flight schedules. And that was like the thing he memorized. And he was like, or like, what's the flight? It's like, oh, he must be on this flight from Chicago to Portland at this time because my mom was going to pick him up from Portland. So like my mom orchestrated my brother running away, which is when you're in custody battles all the time and you don't have any money and you're not paying your child support. Like she was like $15,000 behind in child support at this time. And my brother did it because he wanted to be with our mom because my dad was very like neglectful. He just wasn't around. But also my mom hit us. So I don't really know what was the better scenario, like get hit but have an active mom or be completely neglected but at least no one's hurting you. Like I don't really know.
So she never stopped
being
abusive?
No. Yeah. The last real memory I have of abuse was I was crying because my brother did something and I don't remember what, but I came in and I yelled at her. I was like, you don't even care about me. And she pulled me by my hair into my room and locked me inside until like, I don't know, 2 days later.
Jesus. How old were you?
6 or 7. Yeah. I mean, I was young. And this was at the time she was married to the second husband. So like, she's like, gets married to looks more stable, but then encourages my brother to run away.
Did she want you to run away too? Or was it just whatever
Probably.
she could get?
Yeah. My brother was old enough to like come up with an active plan. And I don't understand her friend in Virginia. Like, how does your friend say, yeah, this is a great idea. Let's go do this. Like, what is this?
Taste for adventure. I don't know.
I don't know. And so when my brother got to Oregon, he was like expecting to see my mom, but my dad had gotten in touch with the state police and they took him to juvenile detention. And like, I don't know if you know much about juvenile detention, but it's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary. And my brother just ran away from home.
Okay.
So he was there for a week before my dad's parents flew up and got him out. And I found out rather recently, like within the last 2 years, that my dad had the option to release him to my mom, and my dad chose juvenile detention. And so that's why I know my brother's very angry at my dad. And I think it really succinctly is like, there's an event that my dad could have made the choice to be like, okay, you can be with your mom, but your grandparents are going to come pick you up. And instead he chose juvie.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I didn't know what was going on. I just knew I went home with my daycare workers, and that was that. And so my mom like kept trying to like fight for custody, and she worked all these jobs and things like that, but she owed so much of child support at that point that she started developing another plan. The plan she came up with was she was going to leave Oregon. She lived in Salem at the time, and she was moving to Washington. And she had applied for a job at the University of Washington, I want to say, as an economics professor. And she got the acceptance letter a couple days after she died, that she got that job. And her plan was to move to Washington.
A couple days after she died?
Yeah.
Okay.
Continue. So we'll get into that. But her plan was to move to Washington, learn to speak Chinese, have my brother and I come up for our summer visit, and then she was going to fly us to China and disappear.
Where did China? Just a place to disappear?
Far away. Far.
Okay.
And this is, 90s geopolitics, so like China was still a bit of a weird, now we have so many tech connections with China, and globalization is much bigger now, but her whole plan was to learn Chinese, kidnap us, move us to China, where it would be harder for my dad to get us.
Wow.
And so in between that, she applied for that job. She filed for divorce from my stepdad. And I have very weird feelings about my stepdad because he would just kind of sit around naked in the living room doing dialysis all the time. And that's like the major thing I remember about him was like him fat, naked, doing dialysis in the living room. I don't know. He was just kind of weird. And I didn't really understand. Like, I was like, why is she with him? They slept in separate bedrooms. Like, they didn't seem like a loving relationship to me at the time. So my mom picked up a taxi cab job. She filed for divorce, picked up a taxi cab job. I think she was in week 2 of the job.
This after she had her PhD?
She never got her PhD. Okay. Her thesis was something about why women aren't awarded PhDs at the same rate as men. And her jury was all men, and they denied her PhD.
Wow.
She was very angry. Yeah, so she picked up this taxi cab job. It was 3 a.m. She had a shift. She was a new driver for the company. They sent her to the middle of nowhere to pick up this guy from a porno shop. And he robbed and shot her. And
Jesus.
I don't know too much about that night, except this is really hard to talk about. I know that he hit her with like the 5th bullet. So she had swerved and fought him off, and he only had like 2 bullets left, and he just hit her with the 5th one. And like there was a sliver that she may have made it. But yeah, he was extreme meth addict, and he had stolen a gun from his stepfather, and his stepfather had like a legal registered weapon, and this meth head stole it from him and shot my mom for $14, something like that. And the car crashed. We don't really know what happened first. Did she crash the car to distract him, or did she die and the car crashed? We don't really know. And someone like up the hill from it heard the car crash And so he called the cops, and the cops came, and they were like, they just found her in the car, and they didn't know where the guy was. But the guy had been walking back because he forgot his Pornomax. So that'll tell you the state of mind he was in, which is not very, not thinking rationally, so to speak. So they caught him. There was a very long series of court trials. There were so many court dates early in my childhood. Like, I remember being 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old in the courthouse constantly with my brother while our parents were fighting in the courtroom. And, like, courts were just such a normal part of my life that it was like, oh, now there's new court dates, which is, at first there was a trial, but it turned into a mistrial. And then there was a second trial where he pled guilty, and he's in jail now to this day.
You weren't at the trials? Or?
No. We weren't there. My mom's parents were there, and I believe my mom's brother was there. My mom's brother is 14 years younger than her. He's like 9 years older than my brother, so my brother and uncle kind of feel more like brothers than uncle, nephew, but I know that my uncle read an impact statement for my brother at the trial, and I know my brother wrote about me. So I was 9. Oh, man.
It's okay.
Like, you think, like, I've told this story so many times that it would make it easier, but it's not. Sorry, a second. So, yeah. And I didn't know about the plan to kidnap us and move to China until much later. And we kind of found it because we were looking through, like, paperwork, and basically she got this acceptance letter to University of Washington. Like, we got it in the mail while we were at her house trying to pack up her stuff. There was this weird moment there that I found out when I was, like, 18 or 19, and it brought up a lot more questions for me. But my dad's mom, and my dad's parents loved my mom. They really did. They were really upset by everything that was happening, but they loved her. And my mom's mom told my dad's mom, we were at her house trying to pack stuff up. And my mom's mom said, "It's a shame she died because she'll never have the chance to apologize to me."
Apologize for what?
Who knows? I'm going to get into my mom's story because I think it explains a lot of why she was the way she was. My dad's mom just, like, sat with that inside her for 10 years until one day I was like, my dad's mom lived in Dallas, and I was at her house, and I was talking about my mom's mom, and I was like, I don't understand why she's like the way she is. And my dad's mom was like, well, I guess I should just tell you this because you're not crazy for thinking that there's something wrong. She told me that, and I was like, what the hell is wrong with my family? And that was probably, like, the first time I thought, like, there's stuff outside of the people who directly interacted with me. There is their families and their story. And I spent a really long time trying to understand my mom's story. So the murder trial happened. I moved in with my dad fully, like, there was no shared custody. And at that point in time, he really didn't have anything tying him to Virginia anymore. So he started spending more time in Massachusetts. And then he moved us to Pennsylvania because he got a job there. And then at that point, my dad's girlfriend broke up with him because he didn't move to Massachusetts. But he couldn't, like, he was having a hard time finding a job. So he moved to Pennsylvania for a while. And then my brother and I lived in Virginia. I lived with my friend and her mom, my friend Heather, and my brother stayed at the house by himself as, like, a 15, 16-year-old. And then we went to Pennsylvania. We lived there for, like, 2 or 3 years. And then my dad got a job in Massachusetts, and then he just moved up there for a while. And my brother at that point was in college, and I just stayed at the house alone in Pennsylvania. I think I was 13, 14. And I was just alone. And my best friend, who is still my best friend, like, I just kind of moved in with her family a lot. I would, like, go over there and, like, grocery shop in their pantry. Mm-hmm. Yeah, my dad was just kind of gone, and I was there by myself. And so I spent a lot of time, like, on the internet. I tried to join a track team, but we had dogs, so I couldn't because I had to come home and take care of the dogs. There was nobody else home. So there was just, like, a lot of growing up I did very early. I actually went to France for, like, a couple weeks to stay with a foreign exchange student that we had hosted the year prior. And when I came back, like, the day after I came back, my dad gave me a cell phone and said, we're moving to Massachusetts. I was like, oh, okay. So we moved to Massachusetts. in Pennsylvania, I had been failing school. I was failing. Like, I failed everything. I wasn't doing homework. I wasn't paying attention in class. I was just kind of elsewhere. But like on standardized testing, I was like in the top 5 in my class. Huh. What I know now is I had trauma brain. So I was just kind of like swirling in the stuff that had happened to me as a kid.
You're like 12 now at this point, or
12, 13, yeah. I was up for expulsion like over a dozen times at that school in Pennsylvania. They were a blue ribbon school, which means they want you to graduate and go to college, and that's how they keep the rates up. So when you're a problem child, they try to expel you because they don't want you in their statistics.
Nice.
Which is very fun. Yeah, one thing I've learned about being a traumatized kid is you end up being a lot of people's science experiments. So like I had this counselor in elementary school who took a huge focus on me, and she would pull me out of class all the time in front of other kids and just pull me into her office to talk about how I was doing with things. And like after my mom died, she was like, can you bring me something that you found very special about your mom? And my mom had written, because my mom was a writer, she wrote this letter to me inside a Shel Silverstein book. Mm-hmm. And I brought it in to show my counselor. My counselor said, can I borrow this? And then like a week later, my counselor said, well, I lost the book. And I never got the book back.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So a teacher would either hate me and try to suspend me a lot. Like they would put me in in-school suspension. I figured out if I didn't wear shoes to school, they would put me in in-school suspension. And then instead of class, I would get to read all day. And I lived across the street from school. So I'd walk to school with no shoes on. Mm-hmm. And then they would just put me in suspension all day. And I was like, I get to read books now.
Win-win.
Yeah. And then when we moved to Pennsylvania, they wouldn't let that fly. They just kept putting me up for expulsion. Mm. So I was up for expulsion a lot. And then we moved to Massachusetts. And it was a much smaller school, and like all of a sudden I was an A student. And my teachers were like, oh, you had a really tough life. Okay, well, let's work with you and figure out how to actually, like I'd never had help with my homework before. I had never had teachers like sit down with me and work on something. And moving to Massachusetts, while it was like weird because I had, been abandoned for Massachusetts my whole life, it ended up being really good for me. And I ended up getting like a full scholarship to college because of my childhood. And I remember I had this social worker when I was 16 or 17. And I had my first couple sessions with her and told her everything that had happened. Her jaw dropped and she had nothing to say. She had like never heard any of these stories before. And one of the things that my high school counselor worked with me on was she was like, put it in your admissions essay. Tell them what happened to you because you're like a phoenix from the ashes. And I ended up getting a full ride to University of Rhode Island.
Wow.
Yeah, it was so like a weird thing like, oh, wow, my childhood was crap. So I got free school. And so I did great in college. I had like a 3.7 GPA. I got 2 degrees at the same time. I was working full time. Like I worked 30 hours a week while I was getting 2 degrees. And I very much just dove into like busy, busy, busy.
Was that kind of your operating mode? Because I was going to ask, like, how do you manage to do this? How were you feeling at the time?
It was like the first time I got to choose what I was doing, and rather than adults choosing for me, it was me choosing, and I just got over busy. I was like, I'm going to work, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to get all this stuff, I'm going to focus, and be busy, because if I'm busy, I don't have to think about anything that happened.
Yeah.
So overall, college was a great success, and I went to Europe for a while. I did like a semester abroad, and after school ended, I did, what do they call it, backpacking trip across Europe, and that was really fun. And then my dad actually helped me with rent for a little bit when I got back so that I could get my first job after college. And then I worked and things were good, but I started like drinking a lot and doing drugs. I just was like burning the candle at both ends. It was like whatever I needed to do to keep myself busy or distract myself or just be under substances. And I picked up lots of bad habits that are still very hard to talk about, so I probably won't, but I just did a lot of stuff that I'm not proud of, and I ended up in a relationship with someone who, he also had a traumatic childhood, same as me, like poverty, disappearing parents, and like lots of chaos and things like that, and our relationship was like probably pretty codependent, but also very abusive in certain ways, and it was what I knew in terms of like men in my life, like the men in my life had always been weird. So we ended up moving because he got into a PhD program, and I think I cried every single day after we moved. Like I was so depressed. I remember thinking like, I haven't seen the sun. I don't know where my friends are. I don't know why I moved here. I don't know why I did any of this. Our relationship is terrible. And he broke up with me. And at the time, I was freaking miserable about it. Like I lost it. Like I absolutely lost it. I did not have a center anymore. I did not have work to distract me. I did not have a relationship. I was nowhere near any of my friends. And I just kind of like flipped a table and was like, I'm going to move to Texas.
Wow.
And that's how I ended up here. But one of the reasons I moved to Texas is because my dad's mom got diagnosed with dementia. And I wanted to be closer to her because she was like such a stabilizing force growing up. So I moved to Austin and been here 9 years now. And when I got here, like the first year I did the same stuff, like drinking, partying, busy. I joined all these sports clubs. I was working all the time, like did whatever I could to distract, but I like couldn't get off the floor some days. I was so depressed. Like I would just kind of like lie down and cry. And then I was like, something's wrong. I need help. I can't process anything that's happening to me. So I started going to counseling. I met a trauma counselor and she did EMDR with me, and we started diving into some of this stuff. And it's where I started really picking up like what were the factors that led into this childhood I had. And I started looking at my mom's relationship with her parents. And I knew my mom never wanted me to say they were her parents. She was always like, they are your Nana and Papa, but they are not my parents. And I never understood that. It was just kind of lost on me because they were pretty nice to me as a kid. My grandmother had an aversion to obesity, so she would like encourage laxatives, and I wasn't allowed to eat bread at her house and stuff like that. Like she was very much like, don't be fat. But that was like the only thing I'd really seen that was like, I would call problematic. But my mom had some scars on her hands from her dad. She got stabbed with forks, and so she had scars in her hands from being stabbed with forks. And her sister, my mom's sister, has a lot of like behaviors that probably most closely associate with borderline personality. And she's like very erratic, and she's sharp as a tack. She's incredibly smart, but very erratic. And she does a lot of table flipping in her own life. And I know that my Nana's mom was an alcoholic, and she was very terrified of having kids, and she would do stuff like beat herself up if she got pregnant and things like that. And that my Nana's dad was, he was an immigrant from Greece, and he was pretty wealthy. He ran a couple businesses with his brothers, but he also was like never home and was really kind of crappy to my mom's grandmother. I learned some stories about how like at one point my mom's grandfather had like left to go back to Greece to tell everybody he knew that he was going to die. And that was it. Like there was nothing wrong with him. He just told people he was going to die, and he just left without telling his wife. And my mom moved in with his wife to like take care of her because they didn't know if he was going to come back. He did come back, and then he actually dropped dead of a stroke. It was the weirdest thing. Wow. But like, because she was an alcoholic and a smoker, and she had emphysema, and she was constantly worried about like my great-grandfather like stepped out on her a lot, like he like slept around, and he had a previous marriage that had a kid, and we have no idea like what happened to the previous marriage or the kid. Like never met them, don't know anything about them. We found it because we were looking at his naturalization papers, and he was like, yes, I'm married with a kid. And that was way before he met my great-grandmother. So my mom's mom grew up in a house that wasn't very loving, and her mom was an alcoholic, and my grandmother ended up with weird stuff, like she, obsessed with being skinny, obsessed with getting papers, like making sure you have a PhD, and like that's the only way you're going to make anything of yourself. And she was just very like verbally abusive and terrible. And my mom and my aunt grew up in that. There's definitely stuff I don't know, but I can kind of imagine that, I think my mom's mom grew up in a house that wasn't very loving in a lot of ways. And then my mom then grew up in a house that wasn't very loving in a lot of ways as a result, because there's just lots of toxic, like generational trauma. And I don't think my mom would have had like the vocabulary to talk about those things. And so I think when stuff went bad, she would just run away or flee or flip a table and go do something, and not really realize that that was her trauma response. She didn't have that language to understand that, oh, I feel like doing this really chaotic, crazy thing, asking my son to run away, selling my house to 2 people, marrying somebody and promising my kidney, moving to China and kidnapping my kids. Like, I feel like doing all of those plans because I grew up in a very traumatic household with like a mom that I could never get full approval from. I always felt like I was fat. I always felt like I wasn't good enough. I always felt like I wasn't smart enough. And I need to push away and get away from that because I know better than them. And then on my dad's side, when I was in my late teens, early 20s, my grandmother told me this story about how my dad, when he was in elementary school, he was nonverbal. And then he went to a Catholic school, and the nuns told my dad's parents to get him a dog. And they got him a dog, and then basically my grandparents had a dog, and my dad kept being non-social. So they moved my dad to like a private school, much smaller, had much tighter relationships with people, and he started becoming verbal and you know, communicating with people, and went to college and did, like, my dad had like a pretty normal life other than those weird things. And I've realized since I've gotten older, I think my grandmother was trying to tell me that my dad is autistic. And he doesn't quite understand social cues. He doesn't understand emotions very well. It's
Your grandmother told you this?
My grandmother told me about the nuns that he was nonverbal, and that the nuns were like, he needs to socialize. He needs to understand social things. Get him a dog, which I have since learned was like the 1960s version of he's on the spectrum. And my dad's never been formally diagnosed, but I look back and I think, oh, my dad didn't understand. Like, it's not normal to leave your kids at home alone. It's not normal to just because your kid is capable doesn't mean you should leave them like that. You know, my grandparents were very normal and loving. And so when he got in this relationship with my mom, he had no conception of she's traumatized. She has a lot of erratic behavior because of these trauma responses. And he probably did everything wrong that triggered all of it. And realizing that my dad is most probably autistic. Again, he's not diagnosed. It's just kind of hit me over time. I like understand his actions in a new way. And it's made me a lot gentler on him because I know that if I tell him exactly, like, I need you to do this, I need you to, like, this is what I need, this is what's hurtful, he starts shifting. He doesn't, like, hold on to treating me that way. And so he's actually started showing up for me a lot more as an adult. And, like, there was one time we had a bad argument maybe 5 years ago, and he said, you know, I don't do well with this stuff. You know that emotions are hard for me. And I think that was him, like, kind of coming around to the idea that he might also be, you know, he won't say it, but I think he kind of knows something's not quite right. It was so funny because I talked to his cousin a couple weeks ago and I mentioned this, and she was like, 100% your dad is autistic. That is a known family thing. And I was like, cool, you guys. So I had this deeply traumatized mom, an autistic father, and grew up in poverty. Wonderful. And then I also learned through that, like, when you grow up really traumatic like that, you end up in relationships that are really traumatic because it's what's familiar. And so it's harder for you to recognize that something's not healthy. And so what I want to talk about here is, like, really that, like, generational trauma shows up in weird ways, and it takes a lot of effort to break the cycle and to not do it to the next generation. I know my brother has kids, and he's trying very hard not to raise them with that chaos. Now, my brother is also working a lot and, you know, running away from his own trauma in that way. But that's what he's choosing to do. For me, it's like I had to deep dive into it to learn to heal. There's a thing that they tell you about when you're younger. You get an ACE score, which is your, like, trauma factor score. So it's like child of divorce, a parent went to prison, poverty. There's, like, all these different factors. And my ACE score is something like 7, which is really high. And
ACE, ACE, or? Yeah,
ACE. Yeah. I forget the exact terminology of it, but you get diagnosed with this ACE score. And what that means is there's medical factors that you have to deal with. So you have higher risk of high blood pressure, stroke, heart attacks, anxiety. Like, basically having an ACE score of, like, over 1 or 2 is like you have, like, a 90% increase in risk for a plethora of medical things. But what they don't talk about with an ACE score is what your resiliency factors are. And there's a lot that you can attribute to, like, why someone would be resilient from those situations. So for me, I had my dad's mom, and my dad's dad too, frankly. Like, he was around until I was in college, and they were very stable and loving and caring, and they always showed up. They would fly to Virginia to take care of us when our dad would disappear. I'm 1,000% sure they were paying the bills when my dad didn't have a job. So, like, I know that my grandparents were there. I had a guidance counselor and a social worker in high school that helped me get into college. And then in college, all of my professors loved me. They, like, took a really deep interest in me. So I have all these resiliency factors because at some points I had an adult in the room who noticed me and went to bat for me or did something to try to help. And how that combats an ACE score is never talked about. Like, you'll get diagnosed with this ACE score and you think, I'm just stuck like this. In like Body Keeps the Score, which is a great book about complex trauma and healing from trauma, they talk a lot about like what physical interventions you can do. So when you like do an MRI or a brain scan of someone who's gone through deep trauma, like parts of their brain just turn off, or parts of their brain go on hyperdrive. Like, people have different reactions. Yeah. And you can see it in an MRI. You can just MRI someone having a flashback and reliving everything, or trauma numbing, which I've done both. I've had flashbacks and numbing where I just disappear mentally.
Have you had an MRI?
I have not had an MRI, no. But like, you can like see the pictures in the book. It's like, that picture is how I feel inside. I feel like some days that the noise won't stop and there's nothing I can do. And there's like an MRI scan of that and your whole brain's lit up, because like your upstairs brain, your like rational thinking brain is trying to make sense of your core survival brain. And either like it fritzes and they don't talk, or it goes on overdrive and they're over talking. And because it's so physical in nature, it's not just chemical, it's like actual structures in your brain develop differently. So like, I probably have underdeveloped prefrontal cortex because when I was a child when these things were happening, which is when my brain was developing. So like, certain neural patterns developed in me that made me more susceptible to depression, anxiety, those things. And so like, to physically get over them, there's a lot of things you can do. Like, I would go get massages. I did TMS, which is they strap a magnet to your head and they click the magnet a bunch. And that's weird. Yeah. I did ketamine therapy. I did 2 cycles of ketamine therapy last year. And I've done meditation is a big one. And exercise. Exercise makes you feel better. It's true. Mm-hmm. So there's like stuff that I think growing up, like, I felt like I'm just this traumatized kid and there's nothing for me. Like, I just am stuck this way. But in my 20s and 30s, I started like accessing tools. So all of these things have like helped me, and I still struggle. Nobody's perfect. I'll still get really angry. I'll still want to flip a table. But I can recognize, I want to flip a table right now. How do I take a step back and figure out why I want to flip the table? And that's like a new skill that I have. Like, I'm 34. I'm learning new skills. This feels great. So yeah.
Are you pretty in control when those things happen, when you feel yourself kind of falling back, that you have the correct or quick enough ways to get out of that? Or does sometimes it's like you just go off the deep end and then you have to like come back out and reassess?
I want to say the prior, but I know the latter happens. Like, I think I do a lot of hiding. That's like a weird thing I'll do. I'll just go into a room and hide from other people.
Like, what kind of hiding? Like hide. Under the sink? I mean, like, literally?
No, I'll like go find a small like closet and I'll just go hide.
But isn't it kind of silly, like putting your hands over your head? Peekaboo.
You can't see me.
Yeah.
Well, when I worked I work in tech, and there's a lot of open offices and they're so noisy to me. And like, then my brain gets noisy and I'll just like go hide in a bathroom stall for like an hour.
Wow. Does anybody ever find you?
I mean, people notice. Yeah, of course they notice. They're like, Kat went to the bathroom an hour ago. Is she okay? And I'm literally just sitting there like, I can't deal with people right now. What's nicer about going through therapy and doing all these physical interventions is my coping mechanisms now are not so like substance-based or risky behavior-based, which I learned later, like, very common for people who had traumatic childhoods to do a lot of risky behavior, because it's like heightening or dulling senses. Mm-hmm. And whatever you can do that, it's like a coping strategy to like, well, this stuff feels so terrible, let me go cause a bunch of chaos, and then I'll be thinking about that instead of the other stuff. So I still struggle with like the noise of it all and needing to take myself out of situations. I get angry.
The noise of your thoughts, or the noise when you're in a noisy environment? Or
all, yeah. Like, noisy environments make me feel like I'm not in control of my situation, and then I just need to hide, because it's like I need to do whatever I can to like quiet things down. But it's not like binge drinking, it's not like smoking so much pot that I can't get off my couch. Like, I think I'd rather go like sit in a bathroom and breathe for 30 minutes than just get blasted drunk after work every night.
Right.
I think like one's probably a little bit better for my longevity.
Probably.
So, I think it'll take different shapes and forms, and it's always a work in process. So, yeah.
You seem very resilient.
Thank
at
you.
this point.
Yeah, and it's weird during COVID because that was like, re-triggering, like, oh, I'm alone and nobody cares about me.
Wow.
But during that time, like, I remember feeling so low at a certain point. I had like broken my arm and I quit my job because I felt like I couldn't type anymore. It was a weird thing. And then I was like isolated in my little apartment, just like, I'm either going to die or I'm going to do something. So I picked up music and I started playing around with music a lot. And then I took some voice lessons from a friend of mine who's a jazz singer. And then I ended up starting a band. And I keep thinking like at some point my songs that I write for my band are going to turn into like, well, this is how I tell my story. This is my friends, my family have all said you should write a book. And it's like, well, maybe songwriting is the book I choose. But every time I try to sit down and think about like the sad thing I want to write about, I cannot do it. I will do anything I can to think about other stuff. So I think having like a healthy outlet where I can talk about these things is probably going to help me. But that's like, the next phase in healing is feeling comfortable enough to share my story.
Yeah.
And like be brave. Like lots of other people who have shared, on Friends with Deficits, there's lots of people who have shared the stuff they've been through. And you never know, like, if your story can inspire someone to keep trying or keep their head up. It's okay to remind yourself that, like, a lot of factors happened that turn into the hard things that happen to you, but that doesn't lock you in a box of being stuck in those hard things. It's really hard to start noticing, though. Like, there's that first step of realizing the bad thing that happened, and then there's the second layer of realizing you can do something now to help you about the bad thing. It's very hard.
Yeah. That kind of gets to my question, which you're sort of answering. Are there benefits to what you've gone through, or what are the benefits?
I'm very empathetic when someone's having a hard time. Like, someone could tell me that they're having anxiety, and the first thing my brain goes to is, like, I don't know how you grew up. I don't know what happened to you as a kid. I don't know what happened to you as an adult. Maybe there's other things I don't know about. Let me hold space for you and let you tell your story, or let you tell me like what you feel comfortable so I can learn. Like, I'm a people manager now, and like knowing how to show up for someone when they're having anxiety. I think I'm pretty good at it because I'm like, there could be 800 reasons why you're feeling anxious right now, and I can hold space for that, and I won't be angry with you.
Do you find that a lot? Like, people come to you, or is it just relationships you're in, or people you know? Or
that's like another thing about trauma. People with trauma histories, you end up trauma bonding with people. You end up info dumping on people. I've had friends throughout the years who have just trauma dumped on me because they're like, well, Kat knows, Kat figured it out. And there's like a boundary to hold between like, I want to help you and be your friend and be that person for you because I know about resiliency and that it requires that you have someone who shows up for you. But I also know it's not helpful to just sit there and let you trauma dump on me. I have to like kind of encourage you to like go seek help.
Right.
Do these physical interventions. I did them and they worked for me. And that's the thing I want to share is that like you have to build your own toolbox at a certain point. So I think like it's kind of a both and situation of I'm more empathetic with people, which makes people feel safe with me. But there's a boundary there of like, how do I show up for someone without letting them kind of take over? How do I like not become codependent with this person and take on all of their badness because I just want to help? And that's definitely a skill that takes a long time to work through. I'm definitely not perfect at it. I think the other things it's helped me with is I'm really like scrappy. Like I am resourceful as heck. Like you can't knock me down. I don't think. So, this year alone, I was in this like severe car accident and I was in the hospital for multiple days and I just refused to get knocked down by it. Because when that car accident happened, I was like, oh, well, I'm already primed for PTSD, so can't wait to just have flashbacks all the time. And I was at this point with my counselor and she was just like, I really want you to drive this weekend. And like that night, I just grabbed the keys, got in my car, and I drove myself somewhere because I was like, I can't let this take me over. And I think I've seen people who like probably had a really good childhood, or like I think as far as I know they've had a good childhood, get knocked down by like dumb stuff. Like I had this roommate once that we lived in this terrible apartment and the ceiling just kind of fell down, like while I was talking to her in her room. She flipped out. She lost her mind. She like totally flipped out and had an awful day. She called her parents. She told them about it, like all this stuff. And I just thought it was funny. And so I've seen that, like, the way that my trauma history has helped me is, like, I know when to let something roll off my back because, like, at the end of the day, well, it didn't fall on my head, so I'm doing great.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Maybe I am like my mom in that way. It's like, whatever it is, I'm going to make a plan and move forward. Hopefully my plans aren't as dramatic.
Yeah.
I hope my plans are a little more level-headed, but I am her daughter, so it wouldn't surprise me if I'm just kind of, like, naturally a bit, I'm going to move it forward no matter what, at any cost.
That's good. I don't know you that well, but you seem pretty even-keeled.
Thanks.
You know.
Yeah,
you know,
that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
I do think now. I think, like, if you went and asked that boyfriend that we had the bad breakup, he would have a different opinion of me. But
Crazy cat. Yeah.
Well, I did spend 4 months crying, so
Wow.
I think I don't. As much as I was very hurt by things that happened, and I won't really talk about too much of it because it was pretty abusive, but I can also understand it might have been hard to be with someone who had a lot of unprocessed trauma at that point in time.
Yeah. Is this like around college?
Right after college, yeah. I was like, I did the things. I got through college. I have a job. I'm doing great. And then it was like not recognizing, like, yeah, and then you just lie on the floor for hours on end just staring.
Yeah.
Which is the numbing out. So, as opposed to a flashback, which is you're kind of elsewhere.
Are you still in touch with your father?
Yeah. Actually, I would say my dad and I have probably our best relationship we've ever had at this point. Again, a lot of it comes down to, like, realizing that, like, he is most probably on the spectrum and I need to change the way I interact with him and be more direct. Mm-hmm. I can't assume that he's going to pick up how I'm feeling. I have to tell him, like, hey, I'm sad that you didn't come to this event that I did, or, you know, I really wish we could have, like, a meal together. Like, if I can say those things directly to him, he always responds well. And then when he has his, you know, he likes model trains and he likes NASA. There's always that meme about, like, I like trains, and that is an autism thing, but my dad really does like model trains. So, like, if I could get him something for his model train set, it'll make him so happy, and that's, like, an easy way to, like, show him I care about him. I think some of the harder stuff has been, like, we've definitely had arguments in my life where I felt like he was feeling like I was my mom. That's been very hard to parse out. And even my now stepmom, so he ended up marrying his girlfriend in Massachusetts, and she's my stepmom now.
I thought you said she broke up with him.
She broke up with him when he moved to Pennsylvania, and then they got back together when we moved to Massachusetts. Okay. So they've been together now for, like, almost 30 years, I think. So weirdly, I've known her much longer than I knew my own mom. But even she and I have had a better relationship recently because, you know, I used to be so angry at her, like, you took my dad. But it's like, no, my dad made those choices, and I think my stepmom in a better world would have preferred that he hadn't done things to neglect me in favor of her. Like, I don't think she's mean like that. So yeah. I think, like, realizing all of those things in hindsight has helped me have just a more open relationship with both of them, and helped me kind of calm down some of the anger I had, because it can feel really crappy when you're like, you never cared. You just weren't there. You just left. And, you know, I don't think I have to necessarily forget about all of those things. Like, I think it's perfectly reasonable for me to be like, that was painful. I'm really sad that you did that. I know I had consequences from that. But also hold space for, like, he's trying today and I can meet him there.
Yeah. And
then my mom's parents, you know, they're still alive, which is rare, I think, when you're in your 30s and you still have a set of both grandparents. But I think I just don't know if I'll ever feel close to them, which is what it is.
How about your brother?
My brother and I are close, yeah. We have a little bit, you know, he still dives into work and overworks, frankly, and I think that's his own trauma response, where he's just like, I gotta stay busy. He's still doing that stuff, and I'm taking a much more, like, I don't need to be busy all the time. I can relax. But yeah, we're very, very close. His wife is awesome. I love her. I have the best sister-in-law in the world. I love my nieces, so they're doing great. I think I'm really proud of him because, like, you hear about people going to prison, and you hear about people, like, with crappy childhoods and that they go into drugs and things like that. And both my brother and I just, like, mostly ended up okay. Like, probably could have made better decisions overall, but we're doing okay as adults, and we really care about each other, and we've definitely started talking a lot more openly about stuff over the last like 10 years versus like, you know, middle school, high school, college. We were not close at all. We never talked because he was really angry and I was really angry and depressed, and we just didn't know how to have a relationship. He was also just a lot closer with my mom. I don't remember too much about my mom, you know. The last time I saw her, I was 8. He was 15. So he had this fully built out relationship with her, and he was, you know, you remember stuff from high school much more than you do from elementary school, I think. So I think his take on our mom would be, I don't think he would see it as kind of crazy as I do. Like, I'm like, that's all crazy. But that's probably because, like, they were more friends with each other than I had the opportunity to be. So I get that. You know, I don't want to sit here and say my mom was this terrible person. She was definitely really smart. She's an economics professor. She was a writer. I still have a lot of her poems and books and things. And she was like, she could play piano, and she was a great gardener. And she always encouraged us, like, let's go rollerblading, let's go hiking. I remember there was this one day when I was a kid where I was like, or I think my mom asked me, like, what do you want to do today? And I was like, I want to ride a pony. And she went and got us horseback rides. And so I have those fond memories of us, like, going blueberry picking and making blueberry pancakes. And I remember one time she was like, go cut me some chives from the garden for this stew. And I went and cut the whole thing of chives, and she just meant, like, cut the tops off. And she just laughed at me. And, you know, I remember her reading books to me. I remember her singing to me. I remember her just holding me and singing Amazing Grace was her favorite song. And she used to sing that to me. So I have all these, like, really fond memories. It's not all bad. And I can see, like, my brother's perspective, like, you know, don't just sit there and think mom was crazy. And I think the older I get, the more I'm like, she had a lot of trauma in her childhood. And when she was an adult, she was just flailing because she never got to heal from it. And I can hold space for that and also feel hurt because I remember getting hit by the hairbrush and it was painful. Yeah.
It's hard holding the vicissitudes of life and
the
just range of trauma and resilience that we all possess.
Totally. It's super weird. It's super weird to be like, I loved my mom and she beat me. Yeah. But I don't know, she got beat, so, like, she's doing what she knew.
Anything else you want to talk about or haven't covered?
There's books recommendations I would like to make for anyone going through their own complex trauma journey. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of what socially we've known up until really recent years is that PTSD is like a single event thing, or like you have soldiers coming home from Afghanistan and, you know, they're scared of like IEDs blowing up in the road, reasonably so, or people in severe car accidents and things like that, or people going through cancer, like that's its own trauma. So, like, complex PTSD isn't like a DSM recognized diagnosis, but it's accepted among a lot of practitioners. And the best thing I think you can do, if you're realizing like a lot of things happened to me, especially growing up, I would go read books and learn other people's stories, because you'll feel way less crazy. Like, you'll feel so normal. You'll be like, oh, this has happened. So I'd recommend What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu. It's awesome. I'm so proud of her for telling her story. It's really, really helpful. Our childhoods don't super line up, but there's a lot of sentiments she expressed that I think I have felt a lot. Body Keeps Score by Bessel Kolk. So grain of salt there if you don't want to support authors that might have some problematic behavior, but he wrote Body Keeps Score about a lot of trauma research they did in Massachusetts, I think at the Children's Hospital or trauma centers or something. He's got all this stuff about MRIs, ways you can physically heal, different case studies of different people who've gone through things. That was very helpful. There are 2 other books, The Whole-Brained Child and The Power of Showing Up. They're by the same 2 authors. And those taught me a lot about how to talk to myself about my childhood, and like recognizing that I grew up in a way that I wouldn't have a whole brain, or that I would have brain issues. Whole Brain Child really helped me see like, oh, here's how I can talk to myself to help my upstairs and my downstairs brain connect. And I think those those 4 books were really impactful to me, and I would absolutely recommend them to anyone.
Cool.
Yeah. And also, don't be scared of making new friends. Friends are helpful. Like, my friends have always helped me along my journey, so.
What's next for you?
I don't know. Maybe I'll write a song about something sad.
I was thinking when you were telling me these nice stories about your mom, like maybe, take that angle or something.
Good point. Yeah.
Blueberries, man. I can hear it now.
I know.
Blueberry pancake song.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good point. Try, like, if you've gone through a lot of trauma, try to focus on things that were good, because it can be really easy to get lost in the sad soup.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's all good. I mean, I should write a song about blueberries.
Getting hungry. That must be it.
Yeah,
It's
maybe.
lunchtime. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
It's really been great, and I'm really happy that you shared your stories.
That's the first time I've talked about it out loud, so I hope my family's okay listening to this.
Hope so, and I'm honored.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Kat. Well, all right. I'd like to once again thank my guest, Kat O'Kane. You can find her music at pocket20.com. That's pocket20. And you can find Friends with Deficits wherever you get your podcasts for free. Looks like you already have. But have you found our Patreon page? It's patreon.com/friendswithdeficits. Visit if you'd like to help support the show and check out some bonus material as well as other adventures I might be on. And thanks as always for listening. Please like, subscribe, review, and tell your friends about Friends with Deficits. Once again, I'm Adam Sultan. Try not to get caught up in the complexity.